So we're doing this series on the ox herding pictures, and this is a story of the journey, the spiritual journey towards enlightenment. And last week we talked about the first phase, picture 1, looking for the ox. The ox is a symbol of enlightenment. So the first page, the first picture, was the very beginning of the search, when we don't even know what we're seeking. We seek blindly, following some inner guide that leads us. And this part of the journey is confusing. We struggle with our own desire to sit, and it's hard to get to the cushion every day. We try different paths. We may start out in yoga, we may start out in a different tradition altogether. We may change teachers. We don't really know what we're looking for, but there's something in us that says keep going. And we hold a lot of doubt. Is there really anything that's going to happen? Today we're going to talk about the second picture, picture 2, seeing the traces. The traces of enlightenment itself, traces of the ox. So I'd like to begin by just reading the preface . With the aid of the sutras, you gain understanding through study of the teachings. You find traces. You see clearly the many vessels are all one metal. And the 10,000 things are all yourself. But if you do not distinguish correct from incorrect, how will you recognize true from false? Since you have yet to pass through that gate, only tentatively have you seen the traces. And the verse, by the water and under the trees, tracks thick and fast. In the sweet grasses, thick with growth, did you see it or did you not? But even in the depths of the deepest mountains, how could it hide from others, its snout turned to the sky? And the waka, determination deep in the mountains, your efforts bear fruit. Tracks, how gratifying to see a sign. So today we're going to talk about just what those signs might be. Of course, everybody's journey is a little different. In this second phase, our practice begins to be more constant. Although there are still periods when we stop meditating. Usually it's a break in our routine. We fall off the wagon, as our old friend Goran used to say. But now we begin to see the effects that our practice is having on our life. So back when I first began to sit, the first thing I noticed was that when I stopped practicing, I was more irritable, more impatient, more reactive. So at that time I had 2 little kids, was working full time, my husband was in graduate school, and I felt a lot of burdens and responsibility, and the idea of meditating appealed to me. I thought maybe it would help me, I'd be more at ease. So I started meditating, and I would do it, I must have been doing it for a couple of months, quite regularly. I was pretty consistent. And I was happier. I was more patient with my kids and my husband. And I was less irritable. This is great, and I promptly stopped practicing. And after not sitting for a couple of weeks, I noticed that I was yelling at my kids again, yelling at my husband, irritable at work, basically feeling overwhelmed and burdened, and like I was doing it all. And then I would start practicing again. That took me back to the cushion. And sure enough, once more I was more patient, more loving, more at ease, and I liked myself more. I was happier. So others' paths are different. Some people find they're less anxious when they sit. I have a colleague who began sitting. He's a teacher now. I haven't seen him for a long time, but he started because he was depressed and was actually feeling suicidal. And his practice completely turned that around. So we still may feel like nothing's happening on the cushion. Our thoughts are still very active. But off the cushion, something mysterious has begun to happen. Something's been activated. Our life feels more at ease. And we begin to practice off the cushion too. Our whole life becomes our practice. We begin to drop the distinction between sacred and secular, between spiritual and not spiritual. We begin to see that if we look at even the things we don't like to do as spiritual, our attitude towards them changes. It's a great little book for this period by Rick Fields, who's passed away, but Chopping Wood and Carrying Water, I think it's called. And I read that book right around this point in my own practice. And I started practicing washing dishes, which, had always been a chore that I hated, cleaning up after dinner. So I had never thought of that as spiritual practice. So I began at this point to think of that as spiritual practice. And practicing mindfulness, I'd be really aware of the sensations of washing dishes. The way the soap bubbles would come up when I rinsed them off, the feeling of the water on my hands, the pleasure I got in loading the dishwasher or not. How nice it was to have a clean kitchen when I was done. And I had the same change around vacuuming. I began to practice while I was vacuuming, another chore I didn't like and always felt, and this is the real thing, I had a lot of resentment. I kept a lot of track of who was doing more in the house. And I always thought I was doing more and he was doing less. And so I, would carry around that little burden of resentment everywhere. So then I started to notice the resentment and thought, well, what if I just let go of that and just do what needs to be done and see what happens? And the odd thing was that as I did that, believe me, it was hard in the beginning, but as I did that, first of all, I was happier. I was happier. Secondly, my husband began to do more. I can't really account for that part. I just know it happened. I think it had to do with the resentment. That resentment is not something you're carrying around and nobody else notices. When you live with somebody, it's very noticeable that you're resenting stuff. And it doesn't always bring the results that you want. So beginning to work with these negative feelings of my own began to change my relationships, all of my relationships, at work, at home. taking responsibility. So letting go of resentment is practice. And letting go of the idea of chores is practice. Just letting go of that idea. That separation between work and pleasure. That is a trace. That's a trace. It's an inner shift. So what happens then is that more moments of your life become precious, become pleasurable. More moments of your life, you are happy. And being happy is really an important part of this journey. It's not so much about being good. Goodness will just manifest when you're happy. But happiness is not about sensual pleasures. It's deeper. It's about giving and supporting others and not carrying around these resentments. We have a limited number of moments. We just have this one short life. It gets shorter every year, goddammit. I forgot this is on YouTube.
There may be worse out there, Roshi.
So with just this simple little adjustment in our minds of how we look at each moment, we can change the quality of our life. We just do the things that are hard, that need to be done, and our life is easier. And in sitting meditation during this phase, especially when you sit retreats or for longer periods, you begin to see and experience your interconnection with all things. Our boundaries soften. We just don't feel as separate. We feel a lot of love. We feel this interconnection with all things. It's actually not an entirely new experience. I remember during a summer retreat in Carmacholin, I think it's changed its name, but up in Vermont. I've been sitting 10, 12 hours a day. And one night I walked out of the Zendo, or meditation hall, and the sky was full of stars. I think I was sleeping in a tent. And I just felt so profoundly connected to that sense of being one with the universe. Now, this is something that I had felt before, but it was memorable. It was memorable. I still remember that moment of not quite knowing how to express it. So in the verse, in the preface, they talk about, you see clearly the many vessels are all one metal. Apparently in Japan they have like a hardware store where you go in and there's all these pots piled all over the place. And they're different shapes, but they're all out of the same metal. So it's an analogy for our one body. And you begin at this phase to get a glimpse of it, to experience that connection with other people and with the universe itself. Our hearts are open. Our emotions are closer to the surface. You may feel great joy. You may feel deep sadness. You may feel angry. It's interesting how different this phase is. And often you feel all of these at different moments. The joy is wondrous. The sadness is mysterious. I can remember crying and not knowing why. Sobbing even. Not knowing what I was so sad about. Trying to figure it out. But it was just some deeply held sadness that I hadn't noticed before coming to the surface. Other people feel a lot of anger, and that's very upsetting because they think it's so unenlightened. But anger is a real emotion. It's part of who we are. And learning to work with our anger so we don't injure others is, of course, a precept. But recognizing it, allowing that we feel this, is very important. It's who we are. And this journey is about becoming a human being. It's acknowledging our humanness and letting go of an idea of perfection. That's an idea that really gets in our way. So you may become more vulnerable in a good way. Vulnerable as in open and available. And a big heart. You may experience a strength in that vulnerability because you're just being yourself without pretense. No pretense. No covering up. It's a real feeling of liberation to be able to just be who you are in each moment. We also find ourselves reading and studying and listening carefully to the sutras as we chant them. We do this without effort, just driven by our own deep interest in what this is about. Struggling to understand, wanting to learn more, wondering about the mystery of it. There's a lot in the sutras that we chant that is hard to get because you need to have some of this experience. So they are intertwined. You get curious, you have a little experience, you try to match them together. Somebody said last time that they're trying to measure where they are, on this ox herding journey. And that's hard to do because we go back and forth. We may have moved all the way up in one sense, and then somebody will make us mad, and we go all the way back. All the way back, we can stay mad for quite a long time, holding on to resentment. And there we are, back in the relative world. Back into the state of being human. Nonetheless, these traces are further inducements to continue to practice, hard as it is. Your questions become deeper. Who am I? What does this life mean? Often a strong yearning arises, a deep yearning coming from our heart. It's very mysterious, but it's really strong. And you have no idea what you're yearning for. It's a very important phase. You want to satisfy it. Keeps you moving forward, keeps you on the path. Your faith that this is the right path for you becomes stronger. It feels aligned with your true nature. Your intuition is more available to you. And you begin to recognize your own inner guide. The guide that gets you to the cushion. The guide that allows you to see more clearly than you used to be able to. It's like the cobwebs have suddenly cleared out of your mind You see people clearly. You see yourself more clearly. New knowledge, not cognitive knowledge, but of inner wisdom is available to you. Your determination becomes stronger, and you begin to find your way around the obstacles in your path. Obstacles are really interesting because you don't see clearly yet that the obstacles are your very life, your life itself. They're not really obstacles, they're who you are. This is your life. This is your own life. This is not the life of somebody you think you should be. So my obstacles, which I struggled with, it was really my life koan, were my husband and my children. Oh yeah, and my job. You know, they kept me from practicing as much as I wanted to. But I didn't really want to give them up. Some people do. Pema Chodron did. She had 4 kids and a husband, and she had a little trouble in her marriage, and she became a nun. But I wasn't prepared to do that. Although there was part of me that wanted to, but I didn't. And I now see clearly that those obstacles were really important for me to struggle with. I had to see them not as obstacles, but as the path itself, as my path. As my path, not your path. You still want to know, to understand, to experience something special. You have a goal. This is a problem. This gets in the way of seeing what is right in front of you, right in the palm of your hand. You're really already enlightened, but it's obscured. There is nothing to get. Just settle in and keep practicing. Keep practicing, on and off the cushion. This is it. This is your precious life.